Hi, I'm Jen Teixeira. I'm the Director of Research Administration, and I work with both Kim and Ashwini a lot, and oversee the Research Administration unit. Okay, that doesn't work.
Yeah. Okay, so we wanted to talk to you about how OSP and the clinical research operations are working together. This is a new endeavor for us. We have not done this before. We have an open dialogue. We are constantly in touch. We have regular meetings discussing projects that are waiting for a project ID, or having a CTA that's stuck, or study teams that reach out to us to find out where their contracts are, so that we get together and we figure out where it is. If there's a glitch, we will sort it out for the study teams and move that forward. And then also, we know that there is a lot of room for improvement, so we're working on a joint process improvement initiatives. We get feedback from all of you, as well as from what we are seeing in the errors that come up, both on the UNC on our side as well as on the research team side. So please do know that we hear you, and we are trying to move things and make them more streamlined and efficient for all of you.
Okay, so the objective for today's discussion is we're going to talk about what's required to get a clinical trial set up here at UNC. We're going to go, we're also going to talk about where do you start, because I think it's a common question. We do a lot of things in parallel. So we have the CTA contracting process. We are going to provide some guidance as well as some tips and tricks kind of filtered throughout that discussion about things that'll help you get through the contracting process a little smoother. What you need to know about CTA budgets and the IRB approval process. So those are the three big ones. We're going to identify some pitfalls. Like Ashwini said, we've already done some process mapping. We've identified some areas that need improvement, and how we can all work together to improve the process, as well as share with you some resources, and then at the end have some time for some Q&A. Okay.
That's you.
Okay. Okay, so what's required? What we're requiring is we need a submitted ALICE record. In that, we need a fully execute, and then ultimately we need a fully executed clinical trial agreement. We need a PI certified RAMSeS IPF. So it's not just a RAMSeS IPF, but the PI needs to certify. We need a fully negotiated and finalized budget. And we needed a submitted and approved IRB approval protocol. So all of those things are required before we can move forward. And all of those components have their own set of processes associated with them. Okay, so all of these should be completed in parallel. So that's kind of what I was talking about at the beginning. All of those different things can be done at the same time. But one of the things we noticed when we're doing the process mapping is you have to be mindful of the dependencies that are inherent in these processes. So you can have a CTA contract that can't be executed because we're waiting on a fully negotiated budget. So we could get all the way to terms finalized with our contracting officer, going back and forth with that sponsor. And if we don't have a finalized budget, we basically have to stop at that point and wait until that happens. We have to have congruency checks, but those cannot be completed without an approved IRB and without a PI certified RAMSeS IPF. But most importantly, those have to be linked in that ALICE record, because we don't know to move it forward. And the way that the system's dependencies work, it won't move into that congruency bucket until such time as those two things are in the actual record and approved. So we'll talk about later, but that's why communication is key throughout this. We need to know as soon as you have that, because the problem is, because you're working in parallel, right? So maybe you submitted your ALICE record, but you didn't submit your IRB before that. So you don't have an IRB number listed in that ALICE record. So you need to communicate back to us as soon as you have that IRB number, so we can make sure it's linked in there. Maybe you didn't submit the RAMSeS record yet. So we need to know what that RAMSeS record is so we can link it into the ALICE record. And then project IDs, they can't be set up without any of these things. So we need that completed congruency check before it even shows up in a bucket for us to be able to set up a PS project ID in our system. So a lot of these are dependencies that are pitfalls, basically, that can really slow down that process.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about the CTA specifically and the steps to get the CTA fully executed. There was a separate presentation yesterday on submitting in CRMS and ALICE. So if anybody missed that, it might be helpful to check that out as well. But the first step is that the department submits a CTA in CRMS. Then the OSP coordinator creates an ALICE record as long as all the required documentation is with the CRMS submission. So one thing to note about that step that I think a lot of people aren't aware of is that when you submit it through CRMS, it kind of goes into what I think of as like the ALICE black hole, because it's not immediately put into a record. So we actually have to have our coordinator create the record. So sometimes I know we get questions about, oh, I submitted this, but I don't have an ALICE number. It's because it hasn't been pulled into the system yet. The next step from there, once there is the ALICE record, is that the contracting team manager assigns the ALICE record to a contracting officer. And then the next step is what can really take a long time, or it can be, hopefully it can be expedited.
It won't.
And that's that the contracting officer actually negotiates the draft CTA with the sponsor. So red lines will go back and forth. It can take a week, it can take several months. Unfortunately, we've seen some take years, which obviously is not the goal. So they basically go back and forth until all terms are agreed upon between the contracting officer and the sponsor. At that point, it goes into terms finalized in ALICE. And as Jen said, it has to stay in that status until the budget is finalized. Once the department budget contact confirms that the budget has been fully agreed to and fully negotiated, the CTA can be executed at that point. So I know some of you might be wondering, well, what can we do to speed up this process? What actually helps the CTA to move quickly through the ALICE process? And there's really three things from a contracting perspective that helps the CTA move more quickly through the process. And that is if there's a master agreement, if we have other agreements with the sponsor and we're able to mirror terms, or if the sponsor will agree to use the ACTA. So the first, a master agreement, most of you are probably familiar with master agreements, but for those of you who are not, a master agreement has overarching terms and conditions that will apply to multiple projects or multiple studies. So all the work and all the time and negotiation is done at the front end of negotiating the master. And then for each specific study, you just have to submit and get a study order signed off on. So there's very little negotiation once the master is signed and we're just finalizing the study order. And then just some examples, we do have a decent number of master agreements with different industry partners, including Gilead, GSK, AstraZeneca. And I would just add, it's not a problem if the study team or the department doesn't know whether or not there's a master. We do that on our end. We check to confirm whether or not there's a master and whether or not it applies. And then the next situation is mirroring terms. So I guess this would be not as smooth as if there were a master agreement, but if we have at least one or ideally multiple signed CTAs with the same sponsor, we can agree at the beginning of the process, like, hey, we've done this before. Let's not start at ground zero. Let's just use a previously negotiated agreement and start with those terms. And usually those can kind of go through the process pretty quickly. And then the third situation is if the sponsor will agree to use the ACTA. So for those of you that aren't familiar with the ACTA, it's the Accelerated Clinical Trial Agreement. To me, it's very similar to the FDP templates, if y'all are familiar with those, in that it's not UNC's first choice position on probably any of the terms, nor is it the sponsor's first choice position on any of the terms, but it's kind of neutral middle ground for each major topic or term in the agreement that has previously been agreed to. And so if we agree to use ACTA, again, there's little to no negotiation and the CTA can be finalized quickly.
It's confusing me because the notes are for the previous slide, but it's my turn. Okay. So what can slow down a CTA? So Kim talked really well about all the things that can help to speed it up. The reverse can be true too. So if we're dealing with a new sponsor we've never worked with before, that can significantly slow down that contracting process. Both parties are going to have to review positions for the very first time. There's no previous agreement or basic understanding of our requirements. So we can't mirror any terms and conditions. We haven't established that relationship. They might not know kind of all of our justifications and our rationale behind some of the things we're required as a state institution. And so we have to do those for the very first time. I will say that even if working with the same company, sometimes you're working with different individuals. So, the same could be true. So responsiveness is another issue that always slows down any negotiation. And that could be any of the parties involved: OSP contracting officers, department contacts, principal investigators, and sponsors. All of us. If we're not responsive to each other and it's taking months or weeks or several months to get responses back, or follow-ups aren't being sent out regularly, all of those things slow down the process. And it was very clear when we're process mapping and looking at stuff, that is an issue. The longer it takes to get a response, the more likely it is that you're going to have to pull that back out because you're like, okay, what did I do? What did I redline? What was the issue? So you're going to have to re-review it, make yourself familiar with it again. And so that in itself is going to slow down the process. And if too much time has passed between that negotiation, so they submitted a year ago and every couple of months there's negotiation, things could have changed since the time that submission came into us. Individuals can leave, core things about the original submission can have changed. And so the longer it takes, the more back and forth, obviously the slower the process. Okay, and then last but not least, what can slow down a CTA is our inability to come to agreeable terms. If we can't agree to certain required terms as a public state institution that we're required to get, or certain things that we're required to get within our clause library, because we've set those as kind of our positions and our standards, one, we might have to walk away, but also it's going to require a lot of back and forth, a lot of red lines, a lot of discussion about why we need that position and what our rationale is for getting that position, as well as it's going to require possibly, if the department's willing to take the risk, maybe it's going to have a non-conforms letter. And that's going to require back and forth with the department to explain what risks they're taking on and if they're willing to take on that risk. So it could require escalation. So we might have to escalate that to leadership to see if we're willing to take on the risk. So all of those things slow down the CTA process.
So a critical piece of what goes in a CTA is the budget. And we've seen a number of times that the CTA terms are finalized and it's just sitting there because we don't have a finalized negotiated budget. So what goes in a budget? You have to know that you can, now remember, you can all do this in parallel, right? You can submit your billing coverage analysis. So that's the starting point of your budget. You look for prices for each procedure in the research fee schedule. You request the prices if they're not in the schedule. You select the appropriate overhead. You negotiate the budget. And then hopefully everything goes well and you have a fully negotiated budget with the sponsor. Who inserts the budget into the CTA? It's not us, it's the sponsor. So what we also need to do is verify that the budget you all have negotiated is the one that has been that has been inserted into the budget. Because remember, when you are negotiating a budget, there are lots of back and forth, and everything is being done in an Excel spreadsheet. So there has to be a check that the budget that you negotiated and sent to the sponsor is the one that they've inserted into, and there is no check of that right now. So that is a process that we are going to be changing, because we want to make sure that that budget is the one that you have finally negotiated and decided upon. We also do, there is also in parallel, you do the IRB approval process. You do the preparation, you do the subject injury language. I am not going to go down that hole for SIL on this in this meeting, but I know we are working on the side to improve that process. And then you do the IRB submission. You have to do the IRB submission here to UNC to get the approval to rely on an external IRB. So the request to submit to an external IRB is needed. So you have to wait for that as well. And IRB approval is needed for the congruency checks. Without IRB approval, the congruency check will not happen.
So what can delay the CTA project setup process? I got all the things that delay, it seems. Okay, so the terms finalized, but there's no negotiated and approved budget. So we shared that with you. Again, it's a dependency that definitely slows down things. We got a fully executed CTA, but there's no RAMSeS IPF. Again, another pitfall we've identified on several occasions. We've got an executed sub, we've got a budget, everything looks like it's ready to go, but nobody submitted an IPF. So we're sitting on it waiting for somebody to submit an IPF. You've submitted an IPF, but it's not certified by the PI. So we definitely need that PI certification before we can move forward. So you got a submitted RAMSeS record, you got a fully executed CTA, it's got its budget negotiated in there, and in RAMSeS there's a red X for COI. That actually is a hard stop. We can't set up anything with that. So beware of red X's and make sure to clear them. The IRB submitted, but there's no approval. So we might have an IRB, it might even be linked to the record, but it's not approved. If it's not approved, it's not going to get into that congruency check. You've got an approved IRB and a completed certified RAMSeS IPF, but neither are linked to the ALICE record. Again, dependency. You have them, but we don't know that because it's not in our system. You need to communicate that to us so we can get them into that ALICE record. So those things that we've built in the system to move things forward in a seamless way will actually work. And then, of course, the congruency check is required to initiate any project ID setup. So all of those things have to happen before it even starts a congruency check. Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to talk about what the study team specifically can do to help the process move more quickly. And the first thing, which seems kind of obvious, but it really can make a difference, is making sure that all the required documents are uploaded in ALICE. So that includes the draft contract in Word format, the protocol, the draft informed consent form, and the draft budget. So again, that may not seem like a big deal, but if all of those documents aren't there, then our coordinator is not going to pull it in. She's going to have to email back and forth to get everything, and it really can add significant time to the process. The next step is making sure that the IPF is submitted and certified. So as was mentioned earlier, we can do these things in parallel. It's not that one has to occur before the other. So the IPF can be submitted at any time, but it is required prior to initiating the project ID setup. The PI must also certify the IPF and RAMSeS. So I know that happens a lot more than you would think, where we have the study team emailing us like, why hasn't this been set up yet? I submitted the IPF and it turns out that the PI hasn't certified, so it's just sitting there and we're not able to move forward with it. And as Jen mentioned earlier, I would say it's surprising, but I guess it's not that surprising that all of these systems do not talk to each other. So just because you've done something in RAMSeS, it doesn't automatically pull into Alice. And we tried to be proactive and be checking to make sure that we have all of the up-to-date information. But if you ever have any doubt or just want to make sure that things are moving forward as quickly as possible, you can always email our OSP contracting inbox.
And I do encourage you to communicate with us through that email if there's any doubt that you might have something. And another thing that I forgot to say previously, because we keep talking about RAMSeS and we keep talking about these different systems, there's actually presentations that happened last week about, or not yesterday, it feels like a week, but yesterday, about how to submit an IPF. So please, if you're not familiar with the IPF process, or if you just need kind of some tips and tricks, feel free to reference that. It was recorded yesterday. It'll be on the website, and a communication will go out about it as well. So what is OSP doing to improve the process? We've identified several pitfalls and process improvement. And so what we've started, or some of the things that we've done so far, and this is not an exhaustive list, and it's not, it's a continual improvement efforts. We've created some auto-generated emails that go to the department and to the PI that happen out of the Alice system when certain status updates have changed. Because, it's not RAMSeS, we have RAM Tracker transparency, but with Alice, it is a different system, and it never had that level of transparency built into it. So this is kind of our first attempt at giving more transparency into the process. We have documented and updated more clear contracting officer expectations around our timelines for when we send out initial red lines, when we respond to red lines, do follow-ups, and respond to departments. So we kind of established some updated, more detailed expectations of our team members, our contracting officers, on when turnarounds need to happen. To help support that and actually provide more tools to the team itself, we've also created reports that are sent out to the contracting officers at the beginning of each week to tell them kind of what's in their queue, what those priorities are, what's coming up in the next week that they really need to focus on and make sure that they work on. And so not only to the staff themselves are they getting that, but the managers are also getting that, a more robust tool. We always had Tableau reporting for several years now, but now it's an email that goes out to the managers, and it actually, shows where everybody is and where the progress of work is. So that's new. That's something we've been working on. We're working to streamline negotiation positions. So the most recent example of that is we went through a CTA checklist that was 55 pages long, and we modified it into a 2-page checklist for our staff to help streamline that process and really focus in on what those issues are. We've also been working most recently with University Council, who's actually in the room, to update our clause library, to identify where there's truly, areas where we need to stop and we need to either escalate or we can accept it. So kind of identifying those red, green, yellows, so we can get to yes a little quicker. And I think we've mentioned at the very beginning, but we're having weekly meetings with Ashwini. And so we've got that open dialogue about anything that's in a project ID setup phase where we're seeing that they're getting stopped, or there's holdups, or we're hearing something. We're meeting on a regular basis to figure out what those issues are, so we can not only identify how to move those forward, but to understand what the underlying issues are, so we can hopefully improve those in the future.
So what can the OVCR do to improve the process? So we truly believe in communication and transparency. We are going to tell you that we've made a mistake, or you all have made a mistake. It's both ways. And specifically, we know that the process is broken in the way because systems don't talk to each other. So to get an Alice record, we have to put in the IRB number and the RAMSeS number or the EIPF number, but we have no idea what you have done. So we go on a search mission to figure out whether that's your RAMSeS number or, and we do that. Sometimes I get emails, oh, I've submitted the RAMSeS. Well, it hasn't been certified. We've talked about that. These are the holes that we have to fix and to make it more aware that this is what you need to do. Research teams now have a central contact in both the OCT and the contracting office. I work with Sandy regularly. She will say, oh, a study team has reached out to me, Ashwini, can you look at it? I look at it and I say, oh, the RAMSeS record is not in. Can they go do a RAMSeS record? So, we are constantly in touch with the study teams. If you see any delays, email us. We'll figure it out, and especially for the congruency checks. So we can do that. The other thing that I can tell you is that the new Research Navigation Hub, which is a One UNC initiative that is going to launch hopefully in November, is going to help study teams navigate the entire research infrastructure and the complexities that it brings with it. So we have a navigation manager and 2 navigators whose primary job is to take study teams and navigate them. Do they have the right contact? Do they have the right agreement? What do they need? We have all these questions because everyone's waiting for something, right? So we are the ones, and I can announce that I have the manager sitting here, Paula Steele, who's going to start, and great changes are going to happen, but we will be able to improve the processes further. Okay, Jen, do you want to take this one?
Sure. So what we're working towards, and I hope you got this from the presentation slides that we've provided so far, we're working on improved and streamlined processes. First step in that phase was identifying what our processes are and identifying some of those pitfalls. We're looking at better system integration. I know you guys have heard, but we're working on what we call single submission, but in the interim, we need to still be improving the systems. So we're working with ORIS and identifying where we can create some integrations in the interim until we get to that single submission process. We're reducing duplication of effort where we can, or we're trying to identify where we can reduce duplication of effort first and foremost. We're working on more transparency into the processes, and we're working on clear guidance and more resources, both to campus, but even internally, so that we can kind of help that process move along a little more smoothly.
And so again, communication is key. We want to hear from you. When something is not moving or something is stuck, please let us know. And a classic example is we just got a master protocol agreement. We've never seen that before. But it had a budget in it. So we thought it's a MCTA, but it has a budget. And it was just sitting there. And then the study team said, well, why isn't it moving? Then we kind of figured out what the project was. It basically it was a master protocol agreement. It had a budget for screening patients across all their sub-studies. But that was the master. The screening budget is the same. And they were going to get the 5 different scopes or task orders for the 5 different studies under it. Without us talking to them and without us trying to figure out what in the world the sponsor is trying to do, we would never even know it. Now, what I do is I bring it to Kim. Kim and I will be discussing it on Monday and say, okay, this is what it is. It needs a project ID for that, but it needs another project ID for all the 5 different studies that are coming along. We would not have moved on it if the study team had not reached out to us and said, they started with where it is, and we searched and we couldn't figure out, and we got talking, and then Kim said, there's a budget in it. And I said, there's a budget. So then we went back to the study team. It was a 10-minute phone call, and we just understood what they were trying to do. So sometimes if you are getting these kind of unique ones, pick up the phone or email us and say, this is a unique CTA. We've never seen it before, and send it to us. And again, I say communication is key. We are here. The process is not perfect, It will never be perfect, but it will definitely get to be much, much better. Again, this is all your different contacts that you have. There's a whole group that you can contact for various things. There's the OSP contracting office. There is, the contract officers assigned to your project that you will be able to see. You can always, of course, reach out to Jen or Kim. And then we have all the different, web links to the industry contracting, Alice and RAMSeS. And of course, in the Office of Clinical Trials, there is the OCT office. I would say email them, but also copy me on it, because then, and remember that OCT, the Office of Clinical Trials name might change in the future. The email might change, but we will let you know about all of that. But do feel that don't feel that you're on your own. We are here and we can definitely move things forward. And we are now here for questions. Yes.
Yeah, is there a list of sponsors that UNC has master agreements with?
We can do that. That was one of the things that we were thinking that we would do. One also thing that you have to remember is that sometimes even though there's a master, they will bring in and say, we need a CTA. Ain't happening. Okay. And so I think that is one of the things that it usually comes either from the CRO who says, oh, I want a CTA. And we say, no, we have a master. So it's going to go under the master. So you have to then send it back to them and say you need a task order. It can be done by the study team, but it is also done by OSP's office as well. But we will definitely put the list of the master.
And I would just say that list is ever changing. So, it's going to change consistently. So if you ever have a question, right, just call us, send us an email, and we always are happy to look it up and say, oh, yeah, we have a master under this. So feel free to communicate. Communication is really the most helpful tool we've got in our wheelhouse here. So
sorry, I know this is a small room, but we're going to use the microphone for your questions.
Oh, sorry, yes.
The master contracts have an ending, right? We recently experienced a pharmaceutical company and the master contract, but when chefs wanted to get an engagement, apparently the master contract ended 2 years ago. So even if you provide the list, we need the end date of the master.
you would only want, and that's kind of my concern about having a stagnant list, is because it's contingent on end dates. It's contingent on, did we add any new ones? The other thing is too, there's definitely instances where they say, well, this master doesn't apply. And then we're going back and forth because they say, no, it doesn't fall under the master. So yeah, we have to be mindful of end date. We have to be mindful of what's active. And, maybe we can. Typically, the master agreements take some time longer to actually negotiate, but they help us in the long run. So it's that proactive action of getting that master in place will help us for those years that master is in place.
Involved in negotiating and approving the budget. If an IPF is submitted after everything has been done and a contract or a clinical agreement was already signed, what is the role of the OSP in dealing with the budget?
There's no role of OSP dealing with the budget. What we are saying is that it all goes in parallel. So you submit the CTA to OSP, to the contracting group for the contract. The budget is negotiated by the study teams and the sponsor independently, but the CTA or the contract cannot be signed or routed for internal, external signatures without a budget inserted into the CTA.
And I think what you're getting at is you get that IPF and it's got a budget in it. How do you verify that's the final budget? And that's one of the things that we're all looking at, is identifying, what goes in that budget. Is that going to be the final negotiated budget in the future? So that way we can ensure that there's some checks and balances. We're still working through that process right now, to be quite honest with you. But as of now, we're relying on whatever is submitted in that IPF has been the negotiated budget with the study team, is what we're relying on.
I actually had an example recently where we negotiated the budget, the sponsor came back and said, okay, that's approved. And then they sent me a template to like transcribe the budget into their. Yeah, no, okay. So I thought that was weird as well.
They should
No.
be putting it into the.
They should be
contract.
doing all that work, so just send it back to them
Okay.
and say that you are not allowed to do this because it's a sponsor budget, but they can put it into their template that goes into their CTA and tell them, please send me a copy. You need to compare it to the one you negotiated and then let us know.
Okay.
So
Yeah, that was the first time that's ever happened.
yeah. I mean, there are all these nuances and new things that and it's ever changing, right? And do remember, the people negotiating the contract are not the people negotiating the budget.
Right.
So they don't talk to each other. And you're caught in the middle because you have to get the budget and then you have to, the contract is waiting, and so there's no perfect parallel position. You just have to, sometimes the budget is ready, the contract is not ready. Sometimes the contract is ready and the terms are finalized and you have you're still trying to find procedure costs. So, you might be.
Yeah, and the same thing is true on our end, because we've got contract negotiators who aren't negotiating the budget. So, it's the same on our end too. We've got multiple parties trying to make this move forward in parallel. And that's why I just stress throughout this, communication is really the most important thing.
And I think yes, and because we're working together, we know what you all are experiencing, and so we can help you move the contract and everything forward.
I've gotten much more familiar with Alice and the pitfalls.
Yes.
over the last
Yeah.
year.
Yeah. And then you have to also remember, on every call, every week, we have John Stevenson, who built the IRB and the URBA system, and we say, oh, we need this, and he will think about a way of getting it. I mean, our perfect is getting the the RAMSeS number and the IRB number in. It ain't happening. So we have to manually put it in. So that is on our wish list, but that is a no-go. Are there any questions online or yes?
So there were talks. always
One minute,
combined-
he's getting you the mic.
The microphone doesn't seem to be working.
Okay,
So
yes.
Just speak up, please. Thank you.
The Oris and Stevenson will combine Alice, RAMSeS and other systems. We have one system. Are we to do this?
Yes, the single submission.
Single-
Yes, it is in the works. It is going to happen. It is coming. It is on the new horizon. That's all I can say. I can't tell you a date. I can't tell you a launch date.
But it is still happening.
It is happening.
We're still doing spec documentation for it. I think one of the
Any
challenges
questions,
we
Enrique?
have is we're trying to continually improve systems like RAMSeS and Alice to meet some of your needs, while we're also trying to build a new system to replace those. So every time we have an update, we're like, oh, we got to make sure that that goes into the new system that we are trying to build. So we're trying to do that all in parallel. Any questions? Was there any online?
We had one online question about plans to implement a more transparent view of where we are in the process. I do believe that was answered in the slides, but I don't know if you'll have anything you want to say.
So this is like, are there plans to implement a more transparent view of where we are in the process, like the swim lanes and CRMS? So I'll tackle that one. We all know that CRMS is going away. As everyone moves into Encore, as that is going to happen in the next year and a half, or the CRMS would go away. And I do believe we all liked the swim lanes. We kind of figured out where we are, where our contract is, what has been submitted. That is in the works. We know that view was great. It is not going to be duplicated in Encore because it's just different. You have to go into ideas, you have to go. So we are trying to figure out what, because the CTA can now be submitted directly into Alice, the only thing and the BCAs can go into the ServiceNow ticket. The only thing remaining is IDS, and that is investigational drug service if you need it. And that is still through CRMS. We will be working on it, and we hear you. The swim lanes were great, but we will try and see what we can do to make that view available, or some sort of a view for all of you. All right. I'm going to count to 10, and then because that's my weight. we wait 10 seconds and then sign off, but thank you. I do believe that please use our contact information. Don't feel that you're on your own. We are all in this together and we want to move research forward here at UNC.
Yep.
Thank you.
Thank you.